Welcome to the first episode of our GURPS series, everybody. For this series, we have Jef and Jon from the System Mastery podcast with us for an absolutely wild ride of character creation and discussion. You do not want to miss this series at all. It is so fun.
It was a blast.
But before we get to this episode, here's what you can expect from the call to action at the end of the episode.
Stick around after the episode for another special Patreon Drive update, including thanking more patrons for their generosity. If this is your first time listening to our show, or you haven't heard the details about the Drive, then you can stay tuned to hear how close we are to giving away custom sets of Character Creation Cast branded D6s from Chessex.
Can't wait. We will also be going over the normal episode closer stuff as usual, as well as highlighting another tier of our Patreon. The last few episodes we've been doing that, so we'll be highlighting a new one this time. For now, enjoy this amazing discussion with Jef and Jon as Amelia and I learn all about GURPS for the first time. Welcome to Character Creation Cast, a show where we discuss and create characters, the best part of role-playing games, with guests using their favorite systems. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan, and this episode, my co-host Amelia and I are overjoyed to welcome back Jef and Jon from the System Mastery podcast to talk about, well, it's finally time, Amelia.
It's time!
We're finally doing GURPS, everybody.
Welcome back to Character Creation Cast. You're the only people that I wanted here when we finally discussed the game that Grant Howitt called a game for people who like to fetishize calculators.
I'm not going to be overly angry at GURPS for being what it is, which is, spreadsheet the RPG.
Yeah.
But whatever, it's fine.
I thought we were here to talk about our favorite RPGs, not just RPGs.
I know, I was trying really hard not to laugh as Ryan was reading that intro. And it was like, favorites, yes. Yeah. We always
if you
have
want,
you two
we can
on.
go get another one of my terrible superhero games from the stack. I have lots.
Usually what we have you here for.
If you ranked all of your games' favorites, like from top to bottom, GURPS would be somewhere in the stack because
it is a game, technically.
It is a game.
I think for most people, it would work that way. I don't know that it does for me because I tend, given the nature of what Jon and I do, I tend to fetishize failure or extreme bad things or just weirdness. And this doesn't even have those.
Yeah, this is just like, congrats, you exist. You made what is technically a game. Yeah,
it's lame for being.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'm still excited either way and a little scared.
Terrified. For people that may have not listened to our other episodes that you both were on, can you remind everybody who you are, what you're up to, all that kind of stuff, why you're here? Why you're the people that we called upon for this?
Why are we here?
That's a really good question. I haven't read GURPS since like 1998, but okay.
I'm sure it's fine.
Sure. Well, we are Jef and Jon, and we are the hosts of the System Mastery podcast, which is also on the One Shot Network, along with you. Our show is dedicated to researching role-playing games that sometimes you've heard of, but as often as not, time forgot. Games that came and went, little flashes in the pan, attempts to start a revolution in game design that just didn't work. And we like to examine why, find weird stories from RPG history, and just kind of make fun of all of them.
Mm-hmm. And hence GURPS.
Mm-hmm. And hence GURPS. One of those games that was really just a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
No one ever heard
it
of.
is now. Nowadays, it pretty much exists as a rounding error on the back of Munchkin.
True.
But yeah, it was an important game for a very long time until Munchkin existed, and now they keep it alive as a legacy product with Munchkin money. But
that makes sense.
But yeah, we have previously been with you folks before. I remember we did Heroes Unlimited. And I'm blanking on the other one. What was the other game we did?
Sentinels?
We did Marvel Superheroes,
Sentinels.
and we did Sentinel Comics,
which we love. Right? Okay. I was like, it couldn't have been a good one. So
no, you did two
one
bad
of those games
and one good game.
Yeah.
And one yet to be determined good or bad game. AKA
no, I know.
GURPS.
You have 3 guesses. The first 2 don't count.
Well, I mean, because GURPS is a generic universal role-playing system, this can also be a superhero game if we wanted to.
Yeah, there's GURPS Supers books out there.
Yeah.
And notably this book, because I don't know, I'm assuming that you read the same thing we did, which was just the character book. We don't find out until you're about 200 pages into it that's all there is, that this core book, this 430-page core book, is not going to include a lot of rules about how to play the game, mostly just how to make your character.
Right. Well, that's the only part we care about. So.
Yes.
Exactly.
I could not remember for the life of me what the U stood for. I was like, it's generic something role playing.
Underground.
And I was
cannibalistic.
Nate looks at me and he goes, unnecessary? And I was like, that's the one. That's the one. Unnecessary.
Unctilious. Maybe just unctuous. Like it's got a lot of meaty vibes to it.
There you go.
But what else do we do, John?
Oh, well, in addition to our System Mastery podcast, we've got Movie Mastery, where we look at a bunch of movies and we have to watch stuff that other people tell us to.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got our Expounded Universe, where we read through old Star Wars expanded universe novels. So lots of stuff.
Yeah, and we're the authors of a couple of books at this point. We've written a couple of a cocktail guidebook set with a bunch of role-playing game jokes all throughout it, as well as a cookbook that's set up the same way. So a bunch of party recipes designed to get food onto the table at game night quickly and without a lot of fuss, and everything's jokes about dragons.
And there you go.
I do have the cookbook, and I don't ever make time to cook anything, but there are several things in there that I thought, that looks good.
There you
looks
go.
like food.
Put it on the cover.
Well, that burger on the cover does look real. I don't even like
looks so
eggs, and that
good.
burger on the cover looks amazing.
Right?
Mhm.
That alone
Absolutely.
is enough to just put on your kitchen counter and be like, this is a food I could have someday.
I might have this food.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's go ahead and sink our teeth into something completely different and start by discussing what GURPS is all about.
What's in a game?
All right. We've hinted at it a little bit. What's the core concept of GURPS?
Math. Math is the core concept of GURPS.
So go ahead.
I mean, it's a point-buy game, and it is completely generic, as the acronym would lead you to believe.
Mm-hmm.
So, this edition that we are doing, the latest edition, is usually you had GURPS and then a ton of GURPS supplements that would go with it. So you'd have you want to play a superheroes game, you get GURPS Supers. If you want to play, a Hong Kong action thing, you get like GURPS Martial Arts. And if you want to do sci-fi, you get GURPS Space and things like that.
Mhm.
4th edition decided to just take everything and slam it into like one giant book.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
So you have a game that now in your core main book has 275 skills.
amazing.
Yes. And this is something that was happening in the early to mid 80s. It was sort of a backlash that was going off about how TSR at the time had Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It had Boot Hill. It had Gamma World, had Indiana Jones, all these games. And every one of them was using its own custom rule system. And so you had to learn a different system for each one of these games you wanted to play. And at the time, nowadays, we kind of view that as charming. We see every game having its own bespoke rule system, and we almost come to expect it from a game that's not PBTA or from the Forge or something like that. We like seeing new rule systems, but at the time in the early 80s, there was kind of this why are we doing it this way? Why don't we do it a better way? Drive going. And this isn't the first. There are, I think, Hero System and Basic Role-Playing from Chaosium both predate this in the mid to early 80s.
Yeah.
But it was the first successful. It started in 85, and it experienced some real commercial success as an engine that purported to be able to do everything. You can play any kind of character. You can play at any kind of power level in any place throughout time, space, and history. And just it gives you all the tools you need to do all of those things. And that was
can you do any of them well?
Well, that's the thing is this is an interesting period in history where we were saying, why don't we universalize game engines?
Right.
You know, why don't we create a single use case that covers every kind of game? And I think it took people going through doing that to realize that, no, you don't need to. It's not necessary. People will learn the rules. They can learn rules just fine if they want to. And also having a single rule system that covers, a Neanderthal and also a far-flung in the future time-traveling alien wizard isn't necessary because while the game definitely wants you to think, oh, one of those is inherently far more powerful than the other one and has all kinds of crazy abilities and so on, do they need that? Do you need to reflect that one of these guys can shoot nuclear lasers and the other one has a bone? And the answer is no, because you're telling a story and they have equal narrative weight.
Right.
Shooting a beam or swinging a bone mean the same thing when you're telling a story. You are attacking something.
Are you telling me that GURPS is very narrative based?
I would say it's
as a system.
It's practically the opposite of a narrative, right? Yeah, that's
right.
It's everything you need but a narrative. And to me, it's interesting because this is definitely something from the era where you really put just so much on the storyteller or the game master or whatever that role was. And in this one, it's you already do that in your basic Dungeons and Dragons. You're like, hey, you're writing this whole adventure. You're writing every NPC. You're doing a bunch of voices. You're running the math. You're saying yes or no to every detail. And in this one, it says, oh, also you have to look through 430 pages of rules and individually go through and say yes or no to every possible feature in advance.
Oh,
right. Yeah, I mean, I it's a thing that we talk about a lot is how do mechanics drive narrative? And this is a game that was like, but like, what if they didn't though? What if those two things had nothing to do with each other?
It's especially weird in the 4th edition GURPS because they took all of these supplements and just jammed them into the main book for this new edition. The whole idea behind it was like, oh, in the 3rd edition, we had all these supplements and people would complain like, oh, I want to do this certain thing, but like this rule is in this supplement and there's no way I can find it. Or, you know, I want these advantages or disadvantages and it's this other book. So they tried to be accommodating and be like, oh, we'll put all of our various nonsense in the main book that we think is important. But it ends up being like a ton of random rules and things where you're like, we've got bits for this that could just be the same as the bit for this, but because it was in a supplement, we're still going to separate it in the main book. Yeah,
I would say, I hate to say this as an example, or for a book that's got this much history and provenance behind it, like a lot of really good designers have worked on GURPS over the years. Robin Laws worked on GURPS for a while. CJ Corella did.
And then also good designers. Yeah, take it. Shots fired.
And cancel it with your AI art. No one wants it.
I did hear a Palladium staple in there.
You sure did. Yeah. But I think the but also good designers is probably aimed at Robin and his current push for saying AI art is okay if I come up with a tortured enough justification. But anyway, shoot, now I'm off my point.
Oh no. Oh no.
Yeah, it's the problem I was going to say. I remember now. It's unexamined. They just piled a bunch of stuff into this book and they didn't stop for a second to go like, oh, wait, if we put this in here, why did we? I mean, I was planning to save this meat for when we got to the skill section, but sure, let's do it before the potatoes. There are multiple obvious duplicated skills in this book because of previous supplement bloat that they didn't think about when they just crammed it all right back into one core book. So, for example, you have the skill karate, and it starts with the first sentence, This skill covers all unarmed forms of combat, all unarmed non-grappling striking attacks, not just the ancient Okinawan fighting style.
But let me guess, there are also other unarmed combat types in here?
Yes, there's brawling, there's unarmed fighting, there's boxing, there are multiple equivalents. And the reason it's there was because the idea back when you bought, I don't know, I assume GURPS martial arts, but who knows for sure. When you bought that, you thought, well, I don't really want to have to go check the main core GURPS book to dig up all these fighting skills. I'll just use this karate one because it says it covers it all. But now you've got duplicated use case, and they just didn't seem to think about it. Not only does that happen often, it happens twice on that page, because right next to that is the skill Judo, which starts by saying this covers all wrestling, not just the ancient Japanese wrestling and locking form. Well, there's also a wrestling skill.
I guess if you're throwing everything into the toolbox and you still have those slightly flavorful differences, it kind of makes sense. Like, I want to make a wrestling game out of my GURPS tool set, not a judo wrestling game.
Oh, yeah. So I mean, I definitely
everybody picked the wrestling skill, not judo.
Yeah, I could definitely see players like nitpicking that and being like, actually, but this one's called, like.
I mean, what players are going to do is pick which one is better and take that one.
Well, that was my next question is that, like, are they like mechanically different then also?
Yeah, they have slight mechanical differences, notably and in particular in terms of what skills interact with them, because you'll also see counter skills that existed for the martial arts themed ones from probably the same book, because there's a skill in the game called immovable stance. And immovable stance is basically you can plant yourself and no one can throw you or move you from where you are. And it routinely reflects throughout it by saying this will counter all of the following applications of the judo skill. But it won't counter any of the applications of the wrestling skill.
Oh,
it doesn't say that. It just doesn't by lack of inclusion. It's just like, well, this specifically notes that it works against judo, which means if you go up to someone with, an arm bar and then you try and throw them out of the squared circle, it's going to work because you're not doing judo.
Right.
So did they not play test this, or did they not have like somebody like?
Well, 4E, in my opinion, is the GURPS for people that already know they want to play GURPS.
Yes.
Okay.
4E was the book that they were like, this is for people that had 3rd edition and just were like, oh, I didn't get all the supplements I wanted, but I still want to play GURPS. Here's a book with all the crap that you already want.
This was not intended to reach a new audience.
Oh, no. When you have a book with 275 skills and, 100 and some odd advantages and then disadvantages and all that, and just this giant list, and you have no rules for the game, that's an entire other 350-page book.
I really love this as a concept of like, people are having to learn too many rules in playing different games. You know what we should do?
What we'll do is just take
Let's make a game. Like, we'll just put all the rules in one book.
Yeah, like the book opens with a very nice foreword. There's a whole Steve Jackson written foreword to the book that basically lays out why this exists, what the idea behind it was, why he wrote GURPS way back in '85 when it started. Like, I was confronted by a baffling array of new games that were coming out, and I didn't know how to play each and every one of them, and I wanted a game where I could switch genres on the fly with my friends and play whatever I want. And also things were too complicated. I wanted a simple system. Boy, does that forward ever start by an emphasis on how easy this is, with a couple of like core points. Like one of the big ones is it uses real world measurements as opposed to some distracting aspect or affectation such as squares or yalms or whatever made up word you're using to describe units of measurement. It's like it uses real ones, imperial ones. You move in feet and miles and you measure in pounds, and that's nice that he was right in that those things have a kind of universally understood sense. If you describe a mile to someone, they have a basic concept. But then you read like the first stat of the game, like, okay, well, how does strength work? And within the first 2 sentences of it, it's already moved into parenthetical algebra of mostly percentage calculating and shifting percentages around and moving numbers inside and outside of brackets. And you're like, oh, this is really mathy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's easy if that's what you had been playing for the last 30 years.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's I could go back and play any Palladium game and be used to it. I haven't played Palladium in like 20 some odd years. Right?
Yeah.
But like the rules, they're complex if you don't know Palladium. But if you played it for like 2 decades,
I'll tell you, speaking as someone who has to routinely dive back in there into the Palladium well, because we've covered almost every one of them on the show at one point or another, mostly what you learn is how much annoying stuff was in there that even if you're like, well, I can still list the stats. I still remember the D20 plus strike versus parry or dodge or roll. I've got all that detail. But then you go into the skill section, you remember skill packages and slow percentage gain upgrades and how IQ interacts with your skills. And you're like, even if it's not quite like riding a bike. It's like riding a really weird, complicated bike that it's easy to fall off of.
You have to have the manual in front of you at all times to reference all the tables. You can't memorize the formulas in games like this, I imagine. But it's interesting because it feels very much like if you just said the concept of GURPS.
Oh, right. Like the concept is like it makes sense.
Like Cortex Prime is like a good example of an evolution of what GURPS was trying for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Pick some systems.
It lived long enough to see itself become the villain in this.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because it's like, yeah, you have to go through and you have to pick every little piece like, all right, players, these skills, these advantages, these disadvantages are off the table. Pick from this other stuff because that matches the genre we're going for. Right? That seems like a lot more. It's like Cortex Prime is handing you a nice brand new toolkit set that's like in the packaging. It's all arrayed nicely and perfectly. And GURPS is like, here's my toolbox from like 50 years ago that I've never organized. Now do the same thing.
And I would say the other problem is that the two do end up at roughly the same state where you can play as anything from anywhere. And they do have, one thing you can give GURPS is that there is a single unifying core mechanic. It's a 3d6 roll under. If you understand how to assemble your target number you're trying to roll under, and then how to roll under it, then you can run the game pretty easily, provided that a character is given to you, which is very similar to how Cortex or PBTA work. You can use them to run anything, and you inherently, once you grok that base mechanic, you understand. For PBTA, for example, you roll 2d6, you add or subtract whatever bonus, and you know the 6 or less, 7 through 9, and 10 plus ranges for things that you get from them, and you can use it for everything. It's the path to get to that point that is different between them in big ways. Like in this case, since everything is so modular, powers and abilities your character have tend to be incredibly complicated. Which I don't necessarily know that I feel like that complication is worth it.
Right.
And that's really the question is like, is the difficulty of this, like, what is the payoff of it? And it feels like no, none, zero.
I think it's like a legacy thing. Like maybe at a time period in the 80s and early 90s when this game was in its heyday, you would look at it and think, wow, I really can make anything. I can make a steampunk blimp captain, and I can make a troll barbarian who can, and every one of their applications is perfectly replicated. And I think it takes a certain bit of RPG literacy and time spent playing and designing and so on to recognize that if your steampunk blimp captain swings his saber, it does the following amount of damage that's relevant, and so does it. Same thing when your troll swings a tree trunk. Right. They're the same. They technically do they're trying to accomplish the same goal. They use the same toolkit to do so. Everything else is just window dressing. This game really lets you decorate a window.
I think too, though, like it is important to look at it in the context of when it happened too, because we are in this heyday now of all of these indie games that like now, Ryan and I, for our bonus content in our Patreon, are designing a game. It's called Undying Bonds, where the whole thing is necromancers and magical girls. Like, that is the theme of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a time where, like, those kinds of things are just happening. We have Itch, we have, you know, Kickstarter, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And that's not the environment that a game like this is coming from either. So it is really easy, I think, for us to sit here now and be like, okay, you can't just make a game that does everything. You can make little niche games that do this. And it's like, but there was a time when that wasn't the way things were being done. It was homebrew. And this was a game that said, let me help you homebrew.
Yeah.
Let me brew it for you.
Right.
No, it's more like let me I'll open up my pantry for you, then let me brew it for you.
Right.
Because ultimately it does just prevent you with a giant brick of parts and not a whole lot of guidelines about what to do with them.
Right.
Which I do think is the failing of this book having every like major supplement just jammed into it. Because before you go, oh, I have the main book, and then whatever I want to go play, it'll be main book plus that. And then you don't have to go through a billion things. You're like, oh, I just look through the stuff that's relevant. But when they just hand you everything for every contingency in one book, that can be a little overwhelming.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. When you want a game about like spaceship races and they're like, but here's all the info on farming. And you're like, this, no.
Like I hadn't read a GURPS book since right around when I was graduating high school. And I had very little memory of doing so, except for one that I purchased and read just because I liked the source material. Because I have the GURPS Discworld. Which is a really fun read, and they did a great job of working it up so it feels like Discworld. It's got that same sense of irreverence and cool wordplay and everything.
You know, because Pratchett actually helped with it.
Exactly. It's just a great artifact and fun to have and read. And that did have a good sense of direction. When you're reading, you're like, oh, I get what this is. I want to play as a dwarf. I want to work in the city. I want to work in Ankh-Morpork. I know, and that's because you're bringing a lot with you. When you're reading the core book, unless you have a very specific idea, it's just a wall. It's a daunting wall.
Right. Which I think leads us to our next question. We love to ask this about not this game. What sort of setting do you play in?
Well,
I would like to know, in particular, since there are all of these supplements in like before this edition, please tell me your favorite.
Well, I will say this. There is actually a canon core setting to GURPS.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
So GURPS
Tell me more.
Obviously a ton of stuff, and you can play in whatever you want. And their main sort of canon setting for this is you are basically dimensional cops.
Oh,
So you have your main planet that's like, I think Homeline is the name of that. And they have this interdimensional SWAT team that basically goes to different places and takes care of problems. So you're like, oh, we're going to jump into this world and it's, you know, overrun with weird like Cthulhu mythos monsters. And then we'll come back and then go to a different world. And it's a high fantasy setting where we need to stop the Thieves Guild from doing a thing. So they were like, oh, we're going to make a core setting that you could technically play in that will let you use all of our.
Yeah. And so, I should point this out. I don't think there's anything in the world that John likes as much as he likes sliders.
Sliders.
Or just anything like sliders where people have to jump from dimension to
I am a big fan of sliders.
Sliders rules.
Every single RPG I've ever heard John pitch that he might be running, like he's like, oh, I'm thinking about running a game. It is always about dimensional hopping.
Oh, yeah.
That you're explaining the adventures that I ran for my home group for like 10 years back in the Heroes Unlimited days of like, we swapped game masters every time we finished an arc. And my arcs were always, what sort of dimensional hopping nonsense can I throw in here for fun?
Yeah. And despite that, the fact that dimensional hopping is just core to John's gameplay love in general. This is the first I've ever heard of him mention the GURPS core rule system or core setting. It's not only is it not necessarily, I mean, it's a great idea. It's a perfect way to use GURPS. Does GURPS even really support it? Like, let's say you wanted to play in that and you wanted to play a wizard and you build yourself a super complicated wizard because Lord knows it's complicated. And then the very first place you jump to is, oh, this setting is low magic. Your spells don't work. And they don't have a mechanic by which you get around that to go, oh, well, yeah, but I'm
the mechanic is your GM doesn't force your wizard to go to a low magic world.
Right.
Whoa, that's not.
Or your magic comes from your home world.
I don't trust a GM of a GURPS.
Right.
I mean,
that's not good enough.
They have rules for like what happens if you are in various magic leveled worlds. And unless you go to one that is literally magic does not exist here, you cannot cast magic.
Yeah.
You can always use your spells. It may just be more difficult or less difficult.
Yeah, your spells have a harder difficulty applied to them, and your recovery of fatigue points slows down significantly.
Yes.
Oh, so they found a way to like make it less fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as opposed to doing the easy thing, which you'd see in a modern game design, which would be like when you go here. Yeah, most of the people in the world don't have magic. It sure is a surprise that you do. Anyway, you're a big hero. Let's move on.
Right.
Exactly.
Magic doesn't exist here, but here's the thing: you're magic.
Exactly.
Support your players. Let them have fun.
Yeah.
Let them do fun
do cool
things.
stuff.
I am absolutely shocked to learn that there is a setting.
Honestly, so was I.
I mean, I already said what my favorite GURPS book is, which is obviously Discworld, because it was at least partially written by Terry Pratchett and because it's Discworld. But beyond that, I think talking about settings here is actually a really good chance to talk about tech level. This game has a variable tech level system that will control a great deal of small things. Basically, if you're tech level 1, you're like Stone Age. And if you're tech level, we're kind of on the cusp between, I think, 8 and 9.
Yeah.
Is the real world between the digital age and the post-digital nano-computer age. But it goes far beyond that. You can get way out into the age of exotic matter, of moving beyond the need to have bodies. So obviously it's supposed to run all the way from caveman type stories to the craziest idea that Larry Niven ever had, for example, or pick your sci-fi author of choice. And tech level is a thing that your character will have locally and personally. If you, for example, are a time traveling doctor, then you may have a tech level of 10 or 11 because you have time travel and you have super advanced physical doctor skills. But if you travel back into the 20th century with that, the local tech level is probably 8, and you are far above it. So you can use certain equipment that other people can't, but you're going to have a hard time using their equipment, even though it should be child's play for you because you're way beyond it. You're way beyond it. And so you don't know, it looks like antiques and museum pieces to you.
Right.
So it works both ways. There are penalties associated with being too far ahead in the tech tree. They're smaller, obviously. If you're coming from the Bronze Age and someone introduces you to a modern MRI machine, you're gonna have a harder time figuring it out than someone from the far future will.
Well, I mean, even nowadays, you get like modern people that are like the young adults that have never seen a VCR before. Like you hand them a VCR and a bunch of VHS tapes, and you're like, make this work. It's not going to be easy right off the bat, or the dial televisions, or, all
like
that
a rotary
sort of stuff.
phone. Like if I handed a rotary phone to my kids, they would be like, I don't understand this.
Right. It takes a little bit of effort, and some of it's just like, this doesn't make sense as a thing that used to be.
Heck,
Right.
Because I'm used to my touch screens and everything.
Oh, yeah. I
you
love
could
watching kids go up to the TV and try and like push it. And I'm like, this is a regular television.
If you give a modern person a VCR, you may as well be handing them a brick, because chances are that thing has AV cables or coax.
Right.
And there's nothing you can plug it into. So
the coax connections alone.
Yep.
So yeah, tech level can be a hindrance even if you're from the far future. But that's kind of one of the major underpinnings of the game is what time period you're from, and they go well into explaining how it can vary across a single world. That maybe you are currently in tech level 8 because you're talking into a microphone and recording a podcast, but there are still Sentinelese folks living on an uncontacted island in the Andaman Oceans that are definitely not at tech level 8.
Right.
So it's not just a sense of where you are in time, but a sense in terms of like culturally, personally, where you are in terms of technological and social development.
And because it's GURPS, all of this has a point value.
Yes,
Of course.
How do you then like play in that like interdimensional space? Like,
Well,
how does it
bonuses.
work?
so when you make a character, generally
and
speaking,
why?
generally speaking, when you make a character, you're going to make them from like whatever setting or world you want them to be.
Mhm.
And, you know, if you make a fantasy character or you make a modern day or whatever you happen to make, and then you get like recruited by this team of interdimensional hopping guys, then you can like, for your character, you are considered to be like, oh, you're on their tech level.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because they bring you in, and before the game starts, you got the rundown on how things work.
You don't
Mhm.
necessarily have to, but yeah.
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 If you want to play a game, or specifically you're like, oh, I'll take the tech level lower disadvantage, get some points off of it, and when they hand me like a laser rifle to go deal with stuff, I'll be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what this is.
Mhm.
But for the dimension hopping thing, you're like, oh, make your character like you would in whatever setting you want, and then they'll just show up with dimension SWAT and do stuff.
I could see this being so frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it can be fun in that kind of a setting. It could be a lot of fun to play as a character who doesn't know what the tech level is. Because, I mean, ultimately, otherwise, you're going to try and go from as far in the future as you can so you can use as much tech as possible.
Right.
Mhm.
But, I mean, if you wanted to play as, like, Attila the Hun's brother who happened to be
Jeff
super...
Hun.
His name was Bleda. If you wanted to play as Bleda the Hun, then you could get, picked up by these people because you had incredible combat skill, and you could have a fun time playing through this game as like, I do not understand why we travel through glowing tubes of light. I just know that I must defeat my enemies when we get there.
Yeah. I do like the thought of like a motley crew of like multi-time individuals and multi-dimensional individuals teaming up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
to it's basically like a more complex Doctor Who, right?
And you
Yeah.
can't tell those kind of stories without having at least one ancient person on the team to be like, I do not understand this crazy flying bird or whatever.
Yeah.
You need that.
Right.
The
Yeah.
base characters they have, the sort of sample characters, are all on a team. And so you have like a fantasy thief that can teleport and a vampire from the modern day sort of like Vampire the Masquerade style vampire,
Mhm.
a Cthulhu mythos professor, and a like
they went
thief,
game
or not
hopping.
a thief, there's a warrior from some like alternate Philippines that's on the team. There's a whole group of people, but they're all on the same dimension hopping team.
Yeah. And it sounds like they mostly went RPG hopping over dimension hopping in that situation because they're like, well, we have to head over to Chaosium to get a Call of Cthulhu, man.
Well, they got to prove that this game can do all those
Yes,
things.
exactly.
They're like, you
Right.
don't need to buy all those other RPGs. You
Yeah.
can
Look,
make
we
those
made them
right
for
here.
you.
This is from back in the age when people were still getting away with publishing conversion guides for other people's RPGs in their books until Palladium put a stop to that with a lawsuit.
Yeah, God knows I remember seeing the how to convert your Rifts character to GURPS
Uh-huh.
in a GURPS book.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that happened. That ended when Palladium sued. I forget if it was TSR or Wizards of the Coast, but they sued one of them for having a conversion thing to put Palladium characters into some D&D game, or I think it was Everway. And right then and there, they backed off, and that stopped happening.
Oh,
Huh.
interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I think my
Okay.
copy of Everway does include the conversion rules for how to bring your character into Everway from like Palladium and White Wolf stuff.
And then Palladium has the audacity to release not one, but 2 conversion books.
I'm not sure what that second one's supposed to be converting anything from anyway. It's just a big list of gods.
Just a whole bunch of pantheons
It
of
might
gods.
be
Yeah.
that might be the worst Palladium
We'd like to
riff
convert
supplement.
you from religion to Palladium.
Yeah, if you read it, you'll come out the other side hating all religions. It's true.
Yeah. We accepted our Lord and Savior.
But yeah, I think tech level is definitely an important part of the understanding the setting at a
Okay.
base level of GURPS.
All right.
It It's the gamut. It's all of time and space and history. It's everything.
Yeah. All right. So then what sort of tools do we need aside from spreadsheets and a supercomputer to play this game?
I mean, obviously, you're going to need the books. The main book that we're looking at is literally just character creation stuff. There's a second book that is then all the rules to play the game. Oh. So about 700 pages worth of book. And 3d6, like we mentioned before, 3 6-sided dice is how you determine pretty much everything in this game. All your skills, your checks, everything is going to be a 3d6, and you want to roll low.
And when we say 750 pages worth of book, I think you can kind of think of it that way and be correct, because I just flipped down to the index to try and find something, and this is a 340 page book, and the within the early parts of the index, like the 4th entry, is something that happens on page 548.
Yeah, they don't start over from 1 in the second book. It keeps going.
Yeah, book 2's first page is page 337.
Yeah, when you are reading this book, you will see something that it'll be like, if you have such and such disease, then you will be incapacitated. See diseases on page 418. And you're like, this book does not have that many pages. They didn't start over from 1. The second book just keeps going.
It's kind of nice in a way,
I suppose. Although it's a PDF. Why didn't they combine them?
I mean, that's fair too. There's got to be a physical book of this somewhere, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. I take back the part where I said I wanted to do this game.
Yeah, you should not have ever said that.
You can't get mad at us this time. This wasn't.
I have no one to blame but myself.
There is no safe word out of this.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
You want to make another Heroes Unlimited character?
I don't know. Here's the thing, I might.
Well, we'll see how bad this is, I guess.
Okay. So, what kind of themes are you exploring in this game? We talked a lot about how clearly this game is not giving you a lot in scope of narrative play. So are we talking about sort of tactical kind of scenarios, or
if you want?
Oh no!
That's the thing.
I wish everyone could see John's face right now. That's just I can't even describe it.
GURPS is very much the, hey man, maybe of games, because it's so modular, and every rule is like, hey, if you want to use this, go ahead, or don't. I ain't your daddy. And so you'll have things where it's like, oh, you can do a basic abstracted game where you full theater of the mind, or you can do a hex grid and, carefully count everything out and the way you are facing matters. And you can do a full tactical game. And all of that is in another book. Sorry, Mario. Our rules are in another book.
Another castle. Oh, no.
But all of it is just yeah, we've released so many books over the years that if you ask, hey, should I be doing whatever in GURPS? It's sure if you want.
I don't know, man. Probably.
I don't know. We got 300 books. You figure it out.
Yeah, this game is probably going to defy a lot of the generic conventions of your show. I know your show tends to be built based on a series of formula or formal questions. And in this case, all of the answers are maybe, I guess.
I know. What do characters do in this game?
Question mark.
Literally.
What do you want them to do?
Whatever you.
Effectively, this is to RPG or to tabletop RPGs what that RPG Maker video game system is to making JRPGs, where it's just a toolkit. And so the only thing you can really measure it on is the value and ease of use of that toolkit. The output is virtually immeasurable because we didn't make anything with it. We just read it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really this is the 50-year-old rusty tools that you inherited from your grandpa. Toolkit compared to anything else.
Yeah, it's kind of like at this point, I mean, it's fun to talk about and discuss. And this isn't even 4th edition isn't even a super old game. It's not that old,
No.
but it is very legacy. It doesn't change much from third edition, so it does feel like a legacy product. But it's kind of like reviewing a washing machine or reviewing a big room full of laundry equipment that does the same stuff as that one laundry machine does now.
Yeah.
Where you're like, yeah, it does it. You can technically use this to do everything a modern RPG can do, but it does fill up a whole warehouse, and you have to know how to use laundry mangles.
It's interesting.
And steam presses.
But it's also like, here's a washer and it only has cold water. Here's a washer, it only has hot water.
Yes.
Here's a washer that has both, but it's larger. Now and so it's like, everything can be done with all of these, but there are 27 machines and you have to pick which one is correct.
And not even you. What's one of the hardest things about reading this is just a prospective player is you're just going to be going down. And there's a point, I messaged John, I don't know, around page 200 something, where I was like, I've hit the skip point where I like read a page at the top of the page and I'm like, no joint locks. Okay. That's one of the advantages. I don't care. I'm going to skip like 3 pages and because I know I'm not going to talk about joint locks in an episode. And yet here we are. Except as an example. Right. I don't even think there's an ability called no joint locks. I just made something up. Sounds right.
I said, so I was saying to like my ex-husband when I dropped off the kids this morning and telling him that we're talking about GURPS and that you two often, when you're on our show, make up rules to see if I'll believe them. And he's like, here's the thing though, they can't do that this time.
I bet we could, but I don't want to. I've got a lot to say.
He's like, anything that they say is probably out there somewhere.
They have enough books. It probably is.
But where I was going was I was saying, I reached out to John and I was just like, I've hit that skip point where I realized that I'm just reading endless rules to feel like I'm doing thorough. And I'm not going to talk about any of this, but I don't know what else I'm going to talk about because the list is what there is. This book is the list.
Yeah.
It's 300 and some pages of just, I'm on another advantage. I'm on another advantage. I'm on another advantage for forever. And when you're reading as a player, maybe you see some that are cool looking, but ultimately when you go to sit down at the table, you're going to have your GM is going to have to have gone through the book with a fine-tooth comb themselves and been like, all right, these things are yes, these things are no. These things are all I'm saying yes because I am running a game that has supernatural elements, except for these ones, they're too supernatural. And so now when you go back and read the book again, you have to kind of put on blinders and skip over a million things in the book. And it really is a strong argument for designing games that have a point to them.
That's an interesting point, though, because a lot of we've talked in the past. A lot of those like older games were sort of like you took your character home and then you made your character and then you came back with the character done because it takes so long.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Whereas now a lot of character creation is collaborative, but this game, it's almost like you would have to do it in a group again, solely so that your GM can sit there and be like, yes, you can do that. No, you can't do that. Yes, you can.
And that'd be the only reason, because it's not a game you could cheat at necessarily. I mean, I guess you could fudge numbers around, but it's a point buy system. Right. So you're not going to come back in and say, oh, I rolled a bunch of 18s. What are the odds? Well, 0.46%. We all know that. But
we do? You do.
Yes, we all do.
No, I know that for this one because I knew them in advance because I've spent so much time reading games. But this game has, I don't know if this is a good chance for me to tell it, my favorite bad example of skill systems.
Please.
Okay. And this is funny. It's not my favorite bad example because of this game, but because it's so common and it's still such a bad idea. And I don't know why everybody does it, but at the start of the skill section, it explains how skills work. You assemble a skill. Your skill is basically one of your 4 stats. The game has 4 stats: strength, dexterity, some kind of intelligence variation. I forget what it's called, and
intelligence.
Health. Intelligence and health. Each one of your skills is basically starts at that value. So if you have a dex of 17 and you want to use a sword as a melee weapon, then if you purchase the skill at its base cost, you have a sword of 17. You can buy it up or down if you want for points. Everything's points. But basically you have a 17. Normal people will have anywhere between a 12 and a 13 in their skills. And everything's 3d6 roll under. So you're rolling under 10, 50% chance. Under 12, 60 to 70% chance. They point out They're like, look, this does make it look like an average person. For example, let's use the example the book does. An airline pilot would have like a 65% chance to successfully fly an airplane. That seems stupid, doesn't it? Of course it does. That's why most people, when they're doing things that are regular for them, like their basic day-to-day activities, roll everything with a +4. If it's mundane or unimportant, roll with a +4. That means your pilot, who, went through the military and is above average a little bit, who would normally be rolling on a 13, is now rolling under a 17. This gives him a 98% chance of success, thus ensuring the world works. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. If you told me that an airplane had a 1 in 50 chance of crashing, I would never fly again, and neither would anyone.
No.
And here's the thing. You may be thinking, well, failure doesn't mean crashing. That's stupid. Obviously, failure just means some kind of thing went wrong, which is what happened when John and I were discussing it. We were like, okay, that probably just means you have to.
That's why you have 2 pilots in there. Yeah. So when one of them's like, I think I'm going to crash the plane, the other goes, hey, please don't.
Yeah. Or you think, okay, well, like there's a fuel light that went off and you have to reroute and land in the wrong spot or something. Any number of minor technical failures that are not crashes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sure. It doesn't work that way, because then you go look up the pilot skill. And the pilot skill has a variable failure rate based on how bad your roll was. And obviously, this is a roll low game. If you roll, for example, anything at 13 or under is a minor technical failure. Your flight's going to continue as normal, but you might need to fix the plane, et cetera, et cetera. All rolls of 17 or 18 are crashes. and what that means
even if your skill is 17,
that's correct.
The game has crit success and crit failure.
Yeah.
A 3 or a 4 is always a critical success. A 17 or 18 is always a critical failure.
Yes.
Wow.
Which means that if you're a pilot with a 13 and you use that +4 rule, and you still have you have to roll a 17 or less, even if you're a pilot who was really good, like a 15, and now you have a 19 at your day-to-day operations, on a 17 or 18, you crash the plane. With no way out of it. The other pilot can't save you. You crash the plane. The only way you can fail as a pilot is to crash the plane. You can't have minor technical failures.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Aren't role-playing games supposed to be fun?
That's the thing.
No, they're supposed to be realistic.
Now they fail
my mistake.
at that.
My mistake. I thought that like the game part in my brain implied that there was like an element of fun. But you're right. You're right. I'm sorry.
So here's the thing. This has come up so often. Specifically, the airline pilot crashes a plane. Don't worry. They succeed 98% of the time. Wait, I'm worried. That means 1 in 50 planes crash. That's insane. It's a terrible design metric, but it's beyond that, because why are you rolling for whether or not your airliner that you're flying on somewhere crashes, or if the pilot crashes the airplane? Is that part of the story? If it is, how come there's only a 2% chance of it happening? If you want there to be a plane crash, why isn't there just a plane crash? If you don't want to be,
roll if nothing's going to happen.
And it does have that in the book. It does say, do not make a roll if there's no reason to make a roll.
Yeah, but here's the thing. This is trying to simulate either realism or fun, and it fails at both. Real airplanes don't crash 1 time in 50. Yeah. And it's not fun to have a 2% chance to crash for that someone who is flying a plane that you're not in for it to be crashed. So it is neither realistic nor fun.
Yeah.
So why and how did they not notice?
Well, because you see, if you're in the plane and they don't want it to crash, you don't call for the pilot to make a roll.
And if
you're piloting and you're in some sort of peril, then you have to make a roll to see what happens.
I guess.
Yeah.
But let me go to bat for GURPS real quick.
Please do. Although I should state that again, that the example is of an NPC airline pilot, not you. That's why it's got the +4 rule applied in discussing day-to-day operations and activity.
But I guess if you combine that with the thought of you don't call for a roll unless something is dramatic, there's like a reason for the crash. Like, oh, you hit the plane hit something. The plane was struck by lightning. You just lost 2 engines.
Yeah.
Well, now let's see how we get out of this if we do.
Yeah.
And then now there's a chance for crashing.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's exclusively a chance for crashing, which is the thing that drives me. Like, to me, this is a whole vortex of small failure points coalescing.
Well, like on the piloting skill, it says you roll against piloting for takeoffs and landings and in any hazardous situation. And the hazardous situation, I'm like, yeah, I get why you're rolling for that. But rolling any time you take off or land is like, Why?
Yeah, we hit this exact same thing. The most recent game that we did that had the exact same discussion was Call of Cthulhu, where it said in modern times, airplanes do not need to constantly roll for takeoff and landing failure. But if you're playing in the World War II era, World War I, or 1800s era version of the setting, there's a 1% chance anytime you fly anywhere on takeoff and on landing that you crash, killing all the people on the airplane. And I was like, why? Right. Do you just want there to be? And it's not even like don't roll if it doesn't matter. No, this one was saying 100% of the time you got to roll this. And I'm like, why? I guess you just want a 1 in 100 chance that your campaign ends.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Like
who's
what's
that
the
for?
Fun in that? Right.
Yeah, drama.
But here we see, and this is another part when I was talking about how this is a vortex of small failure points kind of coalescing. You have that one where the type of failure is by the pilot's skill is defined by the number you roll. Which means that if you're of a certain skill, if you're a good pilot, the only way that you can fail is to catastrophically crash your airplane.
Right.
You can't have a fuel leak. You can't have damage that occurs on the airplane that you can still land and recover from. The only way to fail is a catastrophe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that feels like the opposite. It feels like the more skilled you are as a pilot, the more likely you are to...
The less of an issue it should be, because the more you should be able to correct for it.
Yeah, and the more likely you are to be able to recover from such a thing. Like,
whereas, the way it actually works is the more skilled you are, the better a chance you have of a crit success, because if you get like above a 20 in a skill, which normally in a game about rolling under, and if you get a 17 or 18, you automatically fail, seems bad. They're like, oh no, but that'll bump your crit success rate up to like, now it's a 3 through 5, or at higher ends, a 3 through 6. So you're like, oh, you can get real good at getting like showy at doing a thing, but there is always that chance you just mess up.
Yeah. And that sort of thing. I mean, ultimately it's hard to fault a single game like GURPS or whatever for having a bad crit fail mechanic. Crit fail mechanics are bad. They have never been good. And there's a reason that in a lot of games, they don't exist, even if you think they do. Like there's no crit failure on D&D skill rolls, for example. There never has been, not in a single edition of D&D. But everyone is used to the idea that they do exist. And so they run with them anyway. They're bad. They make your character into a silly joke. And if you're trying to play a serious game and there's a 1 in 20 chance that your character is supposed to be impressing the king and instead poops on his table, that's bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, and that was a good point. Like, it's neither fun nor realistic. So at that point, what are you doing? Yeah,
exactly.
So anyway, I know that's not remotely what we were talking about. It was just one of the things that made me the angriest when I was reading this.
That's totally reasonable. Since most of our questions won't really work here anyway, we can just count that as one of them.
There you go.
Does this game have a bad airline skill example? Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, you messed up. You made something bad about piloting near Jeff.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a couple of traps that books fall into for me that are very specific. It's the airline one, the opposite sex one, which this book does pass.
That's good.
Yeah,
although it does have a skill for how good at sex you are.
Yeah.
So there is that.
Not just sex, but also a sex appeal skill.
Yes, there's a sex appeal skill, and then there's a doing sex skill.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's important to understand that those are not the same thing.
And keep in mind that's because you can do anything in this game. If you want a 3d6 roll under your way through the world of fine sexings, then you can.
If you want to get down big nasty style, GURPS is the game for you.
But in all situations, there's a million abilities, advantages, disadvantages, skills, psychic powers, spells in this game. If they relate to your sex appeal or your ability to be beautiful to a grouping, they always use the term, and this makes me feel like this might be a find and replace, appropriate sex.
You will be one that is attracted to your sex.
You will always be attractive to the appropriate sex. And I know appropriate could, in that situation, have some connotations, like that's just another word for opposite. Like if you were feeling like they were being moralizing.
Socially appropriate. Yeah.
But they do, as John said, they do specifically use of a sex you would be attracted to or would be attracted to you in a lot of situations. But to me, the fact that they use the same language every time makes me feel like there may have been a point in GURPS history where it used to say opposite and they have fixed it. And
good for them.
Good for them. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's laudable.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're doing work that many, many games have not. So
and still won't. There are games coming out every year that still do opposite sex stuff.
You know what? Like I've been playing Fallout 4 recently, and like that one still, like half of the perks in there are like opposite sex, and I'm like, really? This game did not come out that long ago.
Well, it's from the video games though. It came out in the 3D isometric view era of games.
There are some sexuality things in here, or just sort of physical reality things in here that are handled with, I'd say, like tweezers. Like, because again, this game really wants you to be able to play literally anything. You can play as a character who has the disability of like quadriplegic or sociopathic, where you genuinely don't have emotions or understand the emotions of others. And some of them are kind of old-fashioned-y descriptions, like they maybe haven't read a DSM in a while. The beauty section is just like, hey, this is just a reality. Some people are hot. You can be hot if you want. It'll cost you some points.
Wow.
Yeah, this game has a reaction roll so that people who meet you have a initial reaction. And being hot gives you a bonus to reaction rolls.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, you know, when you're going for that simulationist RPG from the past.
The only thing I found, I mean, that's annoying. It's true. I get why they're doing it. It's just annoying. To me, the thing that got me the most kind of my dander up about that section was a description of being like super hot, and how if you have a massive amount of sex appeal to the appropriate sex for you, then that's great. You're going to get a big bonus to reaction rolls. However, other people who have the same predilections you do will instead be jealous of how pretty you are, and you'll have a negative reaction to them. And they'll have a negative reaction to you when you try to deal with them. And I'm like, oh, don't do that. Don't put in
hot. Other people hate you.
Yeah, if you're hot, then people who are like you are like, ew, too hot, hate it. And I'm like, no, I don't.
That's real life, Jeff.
Yeah, but it should be
it
real
happens
life.
to me all the time.
Yeah, I want points for it, though. If I'm like, hey, obviously my friend John's way hotter than me, and you don't see me constantly getting mad at him about it, then I want some points. That should be an advantage, that I'm open-minded or something. Give me some points.
Like not jealous. Yeah.
Your capacity for jealousy shouldn't be powered by my beauty. It should be powered by your character.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but this is all reaction rolls for NPCs, so
that's fair.
Well, gosh, most of our questions just don't work.
Try them anyway. Let's just do them anyway.
Ryan, is it yours? Is it what do characters do?
What do characters do in this game?
Look, man, whatever.
There you go.
We just need a sound clip of that we can just enter in after. Look, man.
Characters are slowly assembled over a period of 3 to 5 hours.
That's what characters do in this game. Get assembled.
Very slowly.
We like the Avengers in here. We get assembled.
Yeah.
There's a section for making for character templates. Where it gives you some like basic, it's a couple of pages towards the near back of the book that give you, I think
it's basically just, oh, did you want to play a detective? Here's 100 points that you can just tick off of your point total, and here's a list of skills and advantages and disadvantages and stuff you can get. Yeah. That way you don't have to go through the book and look for them. Yeah. It's just, here are little archetypes that you can take as packages.
Yes, and the reason I'm bringing it up, I mean, the templates are nice, they're useful for character creation and so on, but they are very illustrative of what it's like to build a character in this game. So, for example, let's say you'd like to make a superhero who can turn their body to fire, like you want to make the Human Torch. And the four of us have done that twice already.
We've all made the Human Torch.
We haven't all made specifically the Human Torch, but we've all made characters in a game where being a being of fire has been a possibility.
Yeah,
for sure.
In this game, if you would like Body of Fire, I'm just going to run through it real quick. The various things that are into the meta trait section of templating for Body of Fire. Your body is a living flame. If your flames are very hot, increase burning attack and DR. ST0, minus 100. Plus 10 HP, 20. Burning attack, 1D. Parentheses, always on, minus 40% aura, plus 80%. Melee attack, reach C, minus 30%. Brackets, 6. Doesn't breathe. Parentheses, oxygen combustion, minus 50%, 10. DR10, limited, heat fire, minus 40%. Bracket 30. Immunity to metabolic hazards. I am 1/3 of the way done.
I stopped listening after like that first sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. Even when you're reading it, you're like, I stopped listening to myself after the first 10 seconds.
Yeah.
That is, it's so much math and so many parts. And every advantage is made out of other advantages and tinier things called traits and quirks, which are small modifications to your advantages or disadvantages that or standalone small quirks or traits about yourself, that building a single power is about as complicated as building a single character in another game.
Yeah. No.
Goodness.
Why did I say I wanted to do that?
Because we need to know.
There's a reason that we're 255 episodes into our show and we haven't done this. We don't have time to read it.
It's so much.
What's unique about GURPS? John?
Pretty much whatever.
I mean, it's got some interesting history to it that is definitely unique. If you're looking at it in terms of game history, then it's the flagship product for Steve Jackson Games for forever, up until Munchkin existed. It's not the first game that's entirely created out of modular parts, but it's the first one that worked. I mean, I have a copy of Hero System floating around in here somewhere, and I think between the two, I would rather read GURPS. Hero System is even mathier.
Wow.
But at least Hero System has a point. Like, you're supposed to make superheroes with it.
Yeah.
So there is kind of but it is the first universal system that you've heard of for most people. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely got some historical oddity and uniqueness to it. In terms of gameplay, it kind of introduced, I don't know that this is necessarily true. Maybe someone's going to point one out that I forgot. It introduced the rolling under, 3d6 roll under templating or mechanic system that now is so common that 2d6 and 3d6 roll under is a term you can throw around and people will know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, I mean, it's got that. In terms of gameplay, it's what you brought into it.
Yeah. That's interesting. Like, speaking of the history, like, this originally came out in 1986.
Yeah.
And that was, as you said, it was in response to like all the specific genre type games out there. And this actually came from a couple components that were released as standalone games from Steve Jackson that he just put together into GURPS.
Yeah, I think I might even have a few of them around here. I don't remember for sure because it's been a long time since I've checked the timeline of Steve Jackson games. But I think, don't quote me on this, I think Toon might be older than GURPS.
Oh.
It has some fairly similar mechanics. I'm not 100% sure there, though.
Okay. I do remember hearing about Toon in the 90s.
It might be from around the 90s. I could just be off base and not remembering any other early GURPS stuff. Yeah.
But I was very surprised that GURPS 4th edition is the latest, and that was released in 2004.
Well, they don't, like I said, they don't really do a lot of changes. The initial one came out in 86.
Mm-hmm.
They did like a year later, the 2nd edition, and then like a year or two after that, 3rd edition, and then that was there forever.
Yeah.
And
this is just 3rd edition, but with more supplements in it.
And in terms of why it's a relatively old game at this point. It's like 17 years old. The reason for that is largely because a lot of Steve Jackson games nowadays are they're not what's keeping the lights on. They're legacy products that are developed and put out when they can as labors of love.
Yeah.
But Steve Jackson games nowadays is a 99% Munchkin.
Yeah.
It feels like it would take a lot more effort to create a 5th edition of GURPS that works in today's environment compared to let's release more Munchkin content.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, this edition being the GURPS for people that already know they want to play GURPS, they've basically made that stand on it of, no, if you want to play GURPS, it exists, go play it. We're not a company that cares about like, ooh, how are we going to take this into the future and modernize it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would not want to write another edition of this. This is kind of similar in my mind, like doing edition design, to why 5th edition D&D kind of had to happen, even though I'm not especially a fan. 4th edition is, and if you've never tried, you wouldn't really necessarily notice this, incredibly difficult to design for. There's a reason you almost never see like what's that GSL takes on new classes for 4th edition D&D, and it's because
it took a lot of work.
It took a ton of work. You didn't get what you got in 3rd edition, which was you came up with a base attack bonus, the 3 saves, and then something that they got at each level. Sometimes they didn't get anything, like a fighter at level 4 or whatever. I forget they get their feats on even or odd levels, but if it's not in the even or odd level, they get nothing. That's very easy to design. In 4th edition, every level had some stuff, and not only did it have some stuff, but it was a choice of stuff. And so it was really hard to design for. And I'm sure that at least in a small part, that was why they moved back away from that when they moved back into 5th edition. And seeing here, the idea of writing all this down again, but updating it in some way is incredibly daunting. And if you're a company that more or less just makes a party card game now, the notion of having all the people on hand to do that is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like sometimes maybe they didn't even have enough people. When they were already.
Nowadays, they could just release another set of Munchkin Super dice and a weird spinner or something and a T-shirt, and they'd be doing much better than if they made a GURPS book.
Okay, hear me out. GURPS expansion for Munchkin.
Oh, already exists. There's both GURPS Munchkin and Munchkin GURPS.
Oh, why?
Oh my God, that's amazing.
You can't think of a way to make money off of Munchkin that they haven't already thought of.
You're right. I'm sorry. My mistake.
It's like coming up with a new rule for GURPS. No, they did it.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm scrolling through as you're talking, and I found in the disadvantages, dependency, addiction, and alcoholism all listed separately.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, again, I feel like that might be this book being kind of a victim of thoughtless accretion. Like they just took, I know they put some kind of martial arts book in here. That one's a guarantee. But in addition to that, there's probably a few other books. I would guess one about classes and military stuff that got just kind of shoehorned in here, regardless of whether or not it was overlapping with other stuff that was in here. Another skill I loved when I came across it was Soldier. Because Soldier, and I already mentioned a little bit about how skills, I mean, we've managed to say very little about how to play this game so far. We mentioned that there are 4 stats and they range between 1 and 20, and that there are skills.
Well, I feel like that seems to be like all you need to know.
Yeah. Soldier is a IQ average skill, which means it has an average point cost. It uses your IQ as your base stat for if you purchase it at the base cost, you would have an equivalent roll under equal to your IQ. And it says right at the beginning of this, hey, look, the Soldier skill covers like 6 other skills. It includes basic lessons in many fields covered by other skills. You learn how to field strip rifles, how to shoot them, how to do radio operation. You can learn how to dig foxholes for combat without learning combat engineer. It basically take this easy, fairly cheap skill and you get 6 skills.
Well, that's like acrobatics and athletics, or not? No, acrobatics and I forget which other one it is.
Gymnastics. You're thinking
gymnastics. Yeah.
Except with the difference being that all those like backflip and roll to tumble and so on in Palladium's 2 physical skills did not exist independently. If you wanted to learn how to walk a tightrope, you needed to take the acrobatics or gymnastics skill. There was no other way to get it. Here, this guy will teach you, taking Soldier gets you a cheaper version of how to shoot rifles, but also there's a more expensive rifle skill you could take if you just weren't reading the book extremely closely.
Well, I mean, it's basically you can strip your rifle without having the armory parentheses small arms skill.
Yeah, that's true.
If you want to,
shoot your
build
rifle
and maintain and do anything with small arms, you still need that skill.
Yeah. Yeah, but there are a couple of these in here. Another one was crewman, which was basically almost everything you need to be someone who lives and works on a giant flying or spacefaring vessel of some kind, like being in an airship crew or something. Which the specificity of that it wasn't just like this is for ships and submarines and so on, but like this is for huge airplanes and spaceships, made me think that there probably is another book that was squeezed in here.
Oh, this very clearly has the martial arts, the sci-fi, the supers, and there were at least one or two other ones that I identified in here that I was like, oh, these are clear books that I've seen before for GURPS.
Yeah, between all the
main supplements that they had.
Like the beam swords and so on. I would say the most infamous one that isn't in here is the vehicles. There's no rules for vehicles at all. And
well, you make a vehicle by point buying a vehicle.
Yes, and if you've ever read GURPS Vehicles, you know it's the most convoluted and unpopular book, even in this line.
Wow.
I feel like, I have heard that it's just like.
Why did they make vehicles so difficult back in the early days?
Realism.
Everyone loves to make vehicles have their own set of rules, and it's
vehicles
amazing.
and vehicle combat.
I mean, heck, if you remember old enough D&D where they still had like, if you get a flying mount, you have to get a whole new map for the game out now because flying mounts use hex grids and everything else uses square grids.
Oh. Oh, why?
So here's what I'm learning 5 years into making this show. I don't actually like role-playing games.
Here's what I'm learning. Games are bad?
I think they might be.
No.
No.
Definitely a lot, but not all of old games are bad. I mean, I hate to say it because that's the kind of rose-colored glasses stuff that means that our show never grows, is us being like, these old games are terrible. And everyone being like, well, I played that when I was 9 and you're dumb. And
when I was 12, everything was great and remains great.
Well, no, but it's like I said before that we do have to look at this as a product of what was happening around there, how the distribution of games worked. And, it's the same thing as like looking at a silent film now and being like, well, I could have done that on my iPhone. And it's like, that's great, but that's not what they were working with.
Yeah. My whole thing is I'm always tempted to give books a lot of credit for being old, just to be like, oh, it was a different time. They didn't know what they were doing. But that, first of all, infantilizes the people who were writing books in the 70s and 80s. And I have plenty of examples of games from that era that rule. And so if I only hold books to standards of other books that predate them.
Right.
For example, we recently did the Dallas RPG, which famously was a huge flop, like a big failure. It nearly killed the company and eventually did kill the company that wrote it. And it is effectively a board gamey LARP about playing as characters from the game Dallas, or the show Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. It rules. I am here to tell you it is one of the best games ever, and it's from 1980.
They were just too ahead of their time.
The
world wasn't ready.
No one was ready to be JR.
No one had the raw force of will to be J.R. Ewing. But it rules. Cool design and interesting and innovative ideas were around and available in the 70s and 80s. And it's always a bad idea to say like, oh, they just didn't know any better, because they could. And in a lot of cases they did.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But not here.
No, we're talking about GURPS here.
I mean, GURPS is still something. Like we were saying earlier, there aren't a lot of books that predate GURPS that do what it does, which is the everything game.
Right.
And, in terms of, do we want an everything game? In a lot of cases nowadays, the answer is just no. It'd be much more fun if your game reflected, if the rules for your game were deeply connected and interrelated with the story you're trying to tell.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
People liked that, and they like it now.
Yeah.
But, in 1984 or 85, when this was being designed, the idea of an everything game was incredibly novel and big, bold statement. So you can't just say, this kind of sucks and call it a day. Like this.
Right.
This is important, even if it's not super useful today.
Exactly.
And I also think there's something to be said for like learning what you don't want.
Yeah.
Because I think that as something like GURPS didn't exist, obviously eventually somebody would have made it probably.
Yeah. It's still in publication.
We can look at a game like this and say, oh, wow, it is actually way better to go find that very niche game that does exactly what I want because it does it better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that kind of vibe you get, that harmonic feeling when the rules for your game line up to what's happening in your game world.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And there's still always a place for the toolkits too. Cortex Prime, Genesis.
Yeah. And you can see that, Cortex Prime is the foundation for my favorite role-playing game, which we've already talked about, Sentinels.
Yes.
Sentinels of the Multiverse, the RPG. It's loosely based on Cortex Prime, but nowadays, instead of saying, oh, we're going to publish the game that is the only game you'll ever need, and it's this giant brick of rules, we say, oh, I'm going to publish a game and then open it up as a license so that people can do those narrow focuses. They can take Fate and make masks.
Mm-hmm.
GURPS did that. Like, you could buy GURPS Discworld and use it to exclusively play Discworld. Although they didn't do as much of a good job of saying, like, okay, we're going to retool all of this cruft, all of these things we developed into a laser-focused game event.
Right.
So that's something that GURPS doesn't do well, and that modern games have kind of picked up and run with that ball.
Well, I don't think we're ever going to be prepared enough
For what we're about to
going
go
into
into.
character creation for GURPS.
No.
Yeah.
But do we want to attempt to make some people?
Let's make some people.
No, let's leave.
Let's make some
Well,
people.
I mean, here's the thing about
Okay,
creating.
yeah, you know what? I've had
Let's
enough. That was great.
We're good.
Creating a GURPS character does take a very long time.
Yes.
And there's not much that you can do to get around it, because not only it's a build-based game, so you're going to be given a set number of points by your GM, who's going to say, like, oh, we're going to play a 200-point game or a 300-point game or a 100-point game. And you get use those points for everything. You're going to use them to buy your stats. You're going to use them to buy skills, traits, quirks, magic abilities if you need to have those. Gear, everything is purchased with these points. And so you're constantly watching that number tick down and up as you take various advantages and disadvantages. And the name of the game in terms of redesigning or modifying your character is percentage changes. So you'll say things like, oh, I'm going to take the ability to shoot a bolt of fire, but I'm going to reduce the range to within a couple of yards of me. And that will reduce the cost of the ability by 20%. And there are two types of rounding that this game gives you.
And the rounding, basically, to make it easy, is always against the player.
Yes.
So
Okay.
if it would be
Great.
good to round up, you don't. And if it would be good to round down, you don't.
Okay.
Wow.
So you're constantly modifying the eventual final cost of every bit of your character as you make your way through the game.
There is also one stat, the only stat in the game, that allows you to have a point at the end. So everything else rounds up or down to the nearest whole number, but there is one stat that is like, oh, did you have a 6.25? No, you have a 6.25 in that. Why would you think you would round? Literally everything else in the game does. This doesn't.
Yeah, what was that, speed?
Basic speed.
Basic speed, thank you, yeah.
Wow.
Okay. This is great.
Choices.
Great.
Choices got made.
I mean, what I'm mostly trying to get across is, while we probably should do character creation, I mean, because ultimately that's what your show is.
Yeah.
I don't know that we want to do it on the air. I mean, one thing we could probably do now before we break is set the point level.
Okay. 30.
We're gonna make babies.
You have a
even
guy
make
and he knows nothing.
We're gonna make babies because
Jon Snow, I did it.
the actual range for if you want to play as like really small children and do like a children's horror game or something is like 50 to 60.
Oh, fine.
Can't even do that.
Yeah,
Okay,
making
fine.
the general, like, I'm making a regular hero, and not like a superhero, but like I'm making a protagonist, is usually around the 200 to 250. If you want to do, like, we're being superheroes, so we have extraordinary stats or abilities or things we can do, then you usually go upwards from like 350 to 500.
Yeah, like I'm looking at a character
What if
creator.
I want to make a largely competent adult?
About 100.
Yeah, to make an adult modern human who's not like a runaround type hero.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I'm a regular person and I know enough to do my job and that's about it. And I get through my daily life technically.
Like I'm
Sure,
looking,
that's about 100 points.
I just dug around online and found a 4th edition character builder. And I'm looking at the pre-gens for if I would like to play as fantasy type characters. For example, a thief or a wizard. If you would like to do that, a starting basic thief using just the pre-gen things is 250 points.
Whew. Good Lord. Well, I guess the big question is then, what are our characters doing?
Well, do we want to make a specific genre or have everyone do whatever they want? Because we could say, hey, we're all making superheroes. We're doing another superhero thing.
I mean, I like the
everyone-
idea of everyone for themselves.
Yeah, everyone
Free for
comes
all.
back and they're like, I made a 100-point regular normal human. And I'm like, I spent 1,000 points and made a demigod.
I mean, that's the thing is a lot of times points are just sinks. Like you can say like, oh, I'm going to build my character with some kind of nuclear death laser that's a single power that takes up 800 of his 900 points.
Right. I want to know how many times I can get points back for severe depression that requires me to roll
severe
every
depression
time you
being a
want to do
disadvantage.
anything.
Severe depression there's not only is there severe depression that's a disadvantage, but also regular depression and manic depression.
Oh, I have that one.
Also,
didn't see
you
that
could,
one.
if you wanted it to not be debilitating, you could just be, as a quirk, sad boy.
Yeah, you could be a post-Morrissey sad boy.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
so
I like
how about we say choose a point value between 100 and 500, however you want to choose that, and then make a character with that, and or at least a concept for a character, and then we can walk through the process a bit because I have no idea what I'm doing. If I have a point value,
Yeah.
I don't know where to go to spend those or anything like that. And then we can go from there.
I think that's a great idea.
Awesome.
Call to action.
Yeah, like that.
GURPS.
I know that it was my idea.
You were pushing for it.
I was. Well,
You-
because
you-
it was originally we wanted to do it for April for our
We did.
like a April Fool's thing, and Jef and Jon were not available.
Mhm.
And it's the thing we talk about so much. It was like, okay, like we should, and now
We should.
5 years into this podcast, we should cover GURPS.
Yeah.
And the timing ended up working out. April 18th, I think, Jef and Jon actually released their GURPS episode too.
Mhm.
So if you're coming from that, welcome. And or if you want more of whatever this was, you can go over to System Mastery and check out their GURPS
Mhm.
episode. But yeah, it was like right away, oh no, this was a mistake. I love where it ends up going.
Yeah.
I really do. It was one of the longest recordings we've ever had. And
Somewhere around there, yeah.
um
I'd say Series 50 was a bit longer, but
well, we broke that one up
yeah,
into two parts. We recorded for 7 hours, Ryan.
we did.
Yeah.
It didn't
So-
feel like it.
It was 7 hours.
Goodness gracious.
So yeah, there's a lot. And it really is an overwhelming system to try and make characters in. But I hope you'll stick with us because it really is interesting what we come up with in all of this. It's pretty good.
Ironically, not as bad as I was fearing. Like,
No, I think
still bad.
it wasn't.
But-
Yeah. Yeah,
From today's perspective,
I
at
think
least.
once I figured out what I was doing, it was really hard to figure out what I was doing. But once I figured it out, then I was okay.
And of course, I had to complicate things, which everybody will find out next time.
Right.
So, but I guess before we let you go for the day, we do have some calls to action. And this is the special Patreon Drive May edition, everybody.
First up, we are, at the time of this recording, on April 25th, currently 93% of the way to our first goal.
Ooh.
So just 2 more $5 patrons will get us all the way there.
Mm-hmm.
If we hit that goal, we'll be sending out custom C3 branded D6s for all of our $5 and up patrons. So you can head to our Twitter to see what those look like, or you can head to our Patreon and sign up.
Yeah. And today, we've been highlighting tiers of our Patreon. We started with the $1 tier. Last time was the $5 tier. This time, I would love to highlight the $10 tier, the tier that we call the campaign level. This is the campaign because it's longer than a side quest and it's longer than a one-shot. And we get to have multiple sessions of just hanging out, as you'll find out. Because at this level, it unlocks monthly Zoom calls with the two of us, as well as the other patrons at this level. It's an opportunity for us to hang out with you for 1 to 2 hours. Generally, it's been on Monday nights. And we just talk about whatever comes to mind. We get to learn a lot about one another. You get to learn a lot more about us behind the mics. And whether you can drop in for only a few minutes or the whole time, it's such a blast talking with you all.
It's so much fun. We have so much fun.
It is so much fun. If you want to drop in, cut up some potatoes, and let us watch your baby for a while, that's fine.
Yeah.
Because that happened last time, and it was a blast.
Yeah. Let's see. What else have we done? We made brownies. Someone made brownies.
Yep.
I think.
Someone made brownies.
Yeah. Sometimes I just sit and color. They're very informal too. It's not like
yeah.
We just kind of sit, and it really is just hanging out, doing whatever.
Mm-hmm. It is so much fun. I know I am having a lot of fun. I have dropped one swear. And I might do it again. So you never know.
Oh, if that's not an incentive to join the $10 level, I don't know what is.
Exactly. And really, I'm not going to say that it's a replacement for therapy every month. But it feels so good. And it is way cheaper than therapy.
Right. It's a little group session, you know?
A little group session of just, supporting one another. So keep that in mind.
That level also unlocks the campaign level only channel on our Discord. So you can join in discussions with other people at that level. And we also have had this accountability thing going that kind of started with our calls, but has continued into the Discord server, where some of us are kind of trying to just better things in our lives, or, get our crap together. And it's been really nice because we've all just been cheering each other on. Every so often we check in and say, hey, I did this thing, and everybody claps for you, and it's very nice.
It is very nice. Yeah,
it's very nice.
Get your own little cheer squad at your back at all times, and that's really cool.
And it's been great because it's such little things that, you can't really, most of the time, nobody claps for those kinds of things. The other day I was like, hey everyone, I remembered to refill my meds only the day after they ran out instead of a week later. We're like, yay.
And it's great because everybody feels very genuine in there, and the energy that we get from everybody at this level is just fantastic. So if you want to join,
good vibes only.
Good vibes only, absolutely. Plus, you get everything else from the $5 tier. So it's like you get this great group of people to help support you and to talk with and to get to know. But you also get the handwritten thank you notes, additional Discord channels, the ad-free feed, undying bonds, thank yous in the episodes, weekly character creation chit chats, bonus outtakes, early releases of episodes, Patreon only Discord channels. My goodness, we have so much, and copies of our character sheets.
You put Patreon-only Discord channels in there twice, so.
I did. So
it's so really much. Get channels.
It's so much. I forgot halfway through typing all of it.
That's right. No, I think we really do have a lot to offer for the price, I think. So it's a good deal, I think, personally.
100%.
We're incredibly thankful for all of the listeners as well, but especially the wonderful and generous folks that are currently helping us out and getting us closer to our first goal during this Patreon drive. That includes our 3 new patrons this week, Ian Potmeyer, Grace Bergeron. I want to say, please also let me know if I ever pronounce your name wrong. Especially Saragoth?
I think it's Sorigoth.
It looks like Sourigoth.
It does, yeah.
But also, that's, my Midwestern American.
There is an actual word, Sorinoth, which is spelled the same way in the front, but N-A-T-H at the end.
I see.
And it seems to possibly follow that similar thing.
Okay.
So let us know.
Let us know how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of your support and generosity. Thank you cards will hopefully be arriving soon. They've all been sent out already, so yay. And then, as usual, we would like to thank our continuing supporters, starting with Lieutenant. Thank you so much for helping us make this show.
DJG, aka Tigranosaurus, you rock. Thank you.
We are very glad to have you here, Eric Bonts. Thank you for supporting us.
Shadim Cabal, thank you so much.
Daryl Holiday, thank you so much for supporting us. We are really glad you're here.
Thank you to the Shyest Barbarian.
Benjamin Sweeney, thank you for your support.
And Lorcan McGinnis, thanks as well for your continued support.
Rob Fletcher, thanks for your support too.
Kevin Brown, we're happy to have you here with us. Thank you.
Thank you to Tentacle Duck. We couldn't do this without you.
John Adamus, many thanks to you.
A thank you to A3 Sketchpad.
Thanks to Cole McCallum. We're so glad to have you backing us.
Thanks to Carlos Salazar. We are so glad you're backing us too.
Eric S., thank you so much.
And thank you to you, Ross Kingston.
And a thank you to all of our future patrons. Your support means so much to us and will help us make this show even better the more support that we end up getting. Again, join us at patreon.com/charactercreationcast and find out all the cool stuff we have going on.
In addition to all of that, don't forget to check out our newsletter coming out this Sunday, April 30th. You can sign up for it and get it sent directly to your email at newsletter.charactercreationcast.com. And join us next week as we dive into GURPS character creation with Jef and Jon and try so desperately hard not to completely lose our minds.
It's a challenge. This is the challenge series, everybody. But with all of that in mind, until next time, take care, everybody. Stay safe, drink some water, relax those shoulders, and keep making those amazing people. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of this character creation series. We'll be back in part 2, picking up right where we left off.
Character Creation Cast is a production of the One Shot Podcast Network and can be found online at www.charactercreationcast.com. Head to the website to get more information on our hosts, this show, and even our press kit. Character Creation Cast can also be found on Twitter at CreationCast or on our Discord server at discord.charactercreationcast.com. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Bolter, and I can be found on Twitter at Lord Neptune or online at lordneptune.com. Our other host, Amelia Antrim, can be found on Twitter at Ginger Reckoning. Music for this episode is used with a Creative Commons license or with permissions from the podcast they originated from. Further information can be found within the show notes. Our main theme music is Hero, remixed by Steve Combs, and is used with a Creative Commons license. This podcast is owned by us under Creative Commons. This episode was edited by Ryan Bolter. Further information for the game systems used in today's guest can also be found in the show notes. If you'd like to support our show, find us on Patreon. Get access to bonus episodes, extra outtakes, and much more at patreon.com/charactercreationcast. Thanks for joining us. And remember, we find the best part of any role-playing game is character creation. So go out there and create some amazing people. We'll see you next time.